Howdy everybody, how y'all doing? And welcome to the Ice House, where we try to keep things cool, calm, collected, and mostly a bit chill, right? Well, if you guys have been following along at home, and I know you do, and I'm not just talking about this channel. Today I'm talking about some of the stuff that's been happening over the last few days, week or so, right? And you probably heard it. You know, there seems like there's a campaign to cancel your Netflix subscription because of some shows on there that may not agree with your values or your moral system, and you know, shows that have been on and off for a few years, and some of the shows I've heard may or may not still be on the platform, right? Which I think is kind of interesting because I know I've been talking about this for off and on a little bit, right? Because I know there's people out here in the audience that, well, due to some decisions that Netflix made years ago, you decided to cancel your subscription because some of the programming that they aired and sort of how they handled certain situations, right? You decided, you know what, that's not for me, right? It's not that I want Netflix to stop existing, it's just I can't support them, right? And that's your prerogative, right? And that's, well, kind of what we do in life when we want to live by our sort of moral code and belief system, right? We want to perpetuate the values that, well, we hold dear, and I think that's admirable, and I think that's, well, a really good place to start. And you know, just kind of on the side note, I found it was a little bit ironic, per se, as well, when a couple weeks ago, when Jimmy Kimmel was put on indefinite leave for about a week, and there were so many people who were saying, I want to cancel my Disney Plus and do all this because if they don't support Jimmy, we're just not gonna support him. And again, ironically, there's been people. Now this is kind of for the other side, right? Kind of opposite reason that so many people have decided to stop supporting Disney because, well, they no longer agree with the values that the company upholds. The company that for, you know, decades, generations, or, you know, a whole century worth of art and entertainment, kind of, in the last few years, seem to have forgotten the significance of their own cultural value and decided to change direction, right? And it's significant enough that a lot of people are, well, they're concerned, right? And the thing that's kind of funny is, in both of these situations, is that, you know, there's a lot of people who've been saying stuff, and people have been saying, you know, it's maybe just do your own thing and stop telling people about it, stop talking about it, we don't care, right? But then all of a sudden, when a bigger name celebrity decides to make something go viral or affect somebody, that a celebrity that you think is important, or somebody thinks is important, I guess, and all of a sudden, everybody's jumping on the ship, right? And I'm not gonna be like the little punk kid that calls everybody a poser for jumping on the bandwagon, but again, it's kind of ironic, right? And that brings us to, well, what we're gonna ponder about today, because today I want to talk about, well, beliefs, boycotts, and the cancel culture conundrum, right? And yeah, because I don't necessarily want to talk about these specific details because that's just kind of a headache, and I'm not going to tell you what to do or how to spend your money because, again, if you have the value, if you have the moral belief, if you have a code you live by, and even if it's something that I don't agree with, you know, 1-to-1 ratio, which is fine, if you're living that in a way that makes sense to you and you're not just reacting to the world around you, but kind of trying to figure out what you believe and living that code, I mean, I can respect that, right? I mean, and we're here to talk about the ideas in the conversation. I'm not really any sort of authority. Just because I have a sheriff badge and, you know, I'm a penguin puppet on the internet, right? Which, let me tell you, makes me more qualified than a Wikipedia page. Right. Anyway, I digress. So, the thing is, and the main point I want to say is, I kind of... There's a gradient here, because I don't really like the word spectrum right now, because it gets kind of used and tossed around in ways, but you get what I'm saying. There's a whole gradient level of the conversation where... Because somehow you get from disagreeing with something, or agreeing it, supporting it, disagreeing with something, and still willing to support it, to, alright, we've been trying to have this conversation, and you're not listening, so we're gonna stop spending our money on your product, right? You know, when maybe it's a big enough shift and a big enough thing that there's a lot of people that don't agree with something that the company has decided to do, and so then there's a boycott, right? And it's not saying that we want them to fail, but we want them to notice that, hey, we're your paying customers, and you kind of miffed us off, and we'd love to support and buy your good product, but right now we can't. We're at an impasse here, and so we're not going to spend money on it. But we also kind of want you to be successful, so maybe we can figure something out if we can come to terms, right? And then you have the whole cancel culture, which is a bit extreme response and reaction to somebody who, you know, something that happens that you don't agree with or don't like, and instead of saying, okay, that person may not be a great person, or they did something I don't agree with, and, you know, leave it be, it kind of gets in that bullying campaign, that trying to push them around and make them feel like less of a person, or, you know, maybe, you know, a recent example is that maybe you had a day and you took the baseball away from a family and a kid having his birthday, and, you know, by the time you got home, people figured out who you were and where you worked, and everybody was calling the school to get you fired, and, you know, I don't really condone that. I don't agree with that at all, right? I've said that before. If there's something to be said about people doing stuff we don't like, and, well, maybe they're a crappy person, but that doesn't mean that they should be bullied out of existence, right? And not everybody gets that way, but I remember, you know, 10 to 12 years ago when some of the stuff really started getting out of hand, and, well, people did take what was said on the internet very seriously and very personally, and did horrible things, right? And reacted in ways that are just sad. And I don't think that's okay, right? Because I definitely get the point of boycotting and not wanting to support something, but to overstep and say that something needs to happen to them, or something needs to be taken away from them, right? Because I don't like what they did, or I don't agree with what they did. And it's not about breaking laws or doing something illegal, it's just something I don't like, right? That's a huge overstep, right? Kind of like what I was saying last week about, you know, some of the censorship and some of the things that if it's something you don't like, but it's not illegal, right? And telling people that they shouldn't do it or taking away from them isn't really the best way to have a conversation. Because, I mean, like I said then, and I'll say now, if you want society to heal, that's not the best way to do it. And this is kind of where I get where it's kind of on the value scale of belief system, because I really think all of these sort of things reflect on how we carry ourselves, how we, well, express what we believe, and how we try to live in the world, you know, trying to portray and live by the moral code and values that we have for ourselves. And sometimes the I would say the zealot extreme, like the religious zealot that is out there trying to get everybody to agree and believe with them, and is in your face and kind of really makes it uncomfortable because, you know, maybe they're not as founded in what they believe. Maybe they haven't really figured out exactly what their solid base is, right? Because to me, the whole idea of, you know, saying I support you and then decide, okay, I'm not going to support you, but I'd still like to be part of the conversation. I'd still like you to be successful, but I'm not digging it, right? To, I don't like you, I don't agree with you, and because you exist in the world, it makes me feel like I can't be settled or comfortable until I've done something to effectively take care of that tick, because I need something to happen to you to make me feel better about my existence because you're different than me, right? That's a lot of things to work through, right? And like I said, it definitely happens sometimes, but I don't think that's the best way to have a conversation. Sometimes working on figuring out why something bothers you so much and figuring out why you're unsettled by somebody else's existence may have more to do with you than them. There, I said it. Okay. And so, the other thing that kind of gets me about this whole conversation is, I remember, 10, 12 years ago when people were talking about, oh, all this cancel culture, it originated back when, in the 80s and 90s with the religious right being, the satanic panic and slapping those music labels, anti, parental advisory, whatever, on the CDs and, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know about you, but I think while some of the religious right was kind of brought into it, I don't necessarily know if it always stems from certain things, because, well, in case in point, at least on this one, the parental advisory stickers, as the story goes, that there's more people like Oprah and Hillary and Teresa Hines, that ketchup lady, that then I wouldn't call them strong conservative right-wing people at all. They decided that was a good moral code, right? And one of the things I find interesting is when somebody comes up with this kind of a moral value or moral conundrum that we need to fix and change. And like I said, I've said before, we need to protect kids for sure. We need to do better about that. So I'm not saying this is the worst terrible example, but the idea that, well, this is something good and we think it's moral, and if you don't think that we should implement this thing in a radical law sort of changing way, that means you're part of the problem and you agree with it. Well, no, not necessarily, just because I don't necessarily agree with, giving the powers that be the allowance to censor certain things that some people don't like, which means that they could turn around and censor other things, and it turns into more of a power and control issue than, and what's allowed for the people, and become dependent on things, right? It's a slippery slope, I get it. But, just because you don't think something is good or bad doesn't necessarily mean everything about the situation is solid and on the up and up. I'll just leave it at that. So, yeah, this whole thing that, if you want to blame it on the 80s and 90s, right? But if you're saying that in 2012, 2015, I got a newsflash for you, Walter Cronkite. Oh, sorry. Zoolander got me again. Is that if it's, 20, 30 years later, that means you're at least 20 to 30 years old. That means you're kind of an adult. And blaming your parents or the last generation for their issues is one thing, but saying that you're blindly following and escalating something that you learned as a kid because that's easier than taking accountability for your own actions, I don't necessarily agree with that either, right? I think maybe there's some middle ground there, and like I said, the cancel culture of going after somebody's livelihood or trying to get them fired from a job because we don't like what they said or did, or, yeah. Because, let's face it, there's some companies, that they're not big enough, and they take a hit, and sometimes they don't recover, right? And And sometimes they're big enough that they're like, we're gonna take the gamble, right? You know, because, well, I don't know where you were the last few years, but Drunkwaddle, my Canadian friend, he told me that when the Bud Light thing happened, there was a whole lot of Bud Light on the shelves for weeks and months and years, right? And maybe somewhere down the line, people decide, hey, you know what? Bud Light hasn't had any weird, annoying ads for a while, and you know what? Maybe I'll see if I like that cheap beer again. But when you're not the only cheap beer on the market, people can change, right? And the same thing with Disney. There's so many people that still believe in Disney. They still believe in what Disney stands for as far as being such a prominent, important aspect of culture and entertainment and the stories that we grew up with and the values that have been instilled in so many people, right? And after a century, that even though the last few years have been rough, even though there are people saying they want to boycott Disney Plus and they don't want to go to the parks and spend money there because they want Disney to listen. They want Disney to, well, they believe in, they believe and they want to be able to clap for Tinkerbell again, right? And the hope is that Disney will kind of figure that out and understand their cultural significance before people stop wanting to clap for Tinkerbell. So, yeah, that's about all I got. Like I said, I'm not going to tell you what to do or tell you what to believe. I'd love to have a conversation with you, though. If you want to drop comments down below, that kind of helps with the whole thing with YouTube telling us, we need interactions for it to count and all that jazz. So, but I actually appreciate the likes and the comments because I like responding to you guys and hearing what you have to say. So, I mean, if you want to like it or share it out, that's really cool too. I appreciate that. So, well, like I said, that's pretty much it. And I hope that you guys know what you believe, or you're figuring out what you believe and how you want to carry yourself in the world in a way that is respectful to others and part of a conversation in a way that, even if we don't have all the shared values, that we can figure out how to navigate life in a way that's respectful, as we go along. So, well, guess that's it. Till next time, we'll see you later. Bye!